Welcome to Bonehead. It is our pleasure. What?
You know,
Chad?
this is actually a very special episode of Bonehead.
How's it special?
It's the very first episode where I don't have my braces. They got removed.
Yeah,
That's
I
great.
know. And you must have also got your first pube. So
Mate, yeah.
great.
Oh, also, movie, television, and podcasting legend Mick Garris is here with us today.
Yeah, but that's secondary. By the way, Mick, we were doing research before we had this, of course, even though we knew your career, and I never listened to Chad, I completely forgot Gilbert Gottfried's name.
Gilbert Gottfried's podcast.
Yeah, we actually love Gilbert's podcast, but I'd never listened to yours because Gilbert actually has a lot of the same interests that the rest of us geeks have as well, right?
Yeah, I was surprised to find that, and one of the reasons it's so good is their producer, Frank Santopadre, really knows his stuff and does a lot of research for Gilbert, and Frank obviously chips in a lot. And that was one of my favorite appearances on a podcast. Gilbert did a great job.
You were fantastic, but Gilbert does the introductions and they take an hour and a half, and you could and it's not just you, there's 100 other people you can hear going, it's over with yet. You've just talked about me for 20 minutes.
I was able to nap. It was nice.
Right. All right. Chad had our first question, and go Chad.
So this is a very hard-hitting...
on getting the braces off, Chad.
Thank you.
And his first pube.
And your first pube. Don't pluck it.
Wait for the man bush.
If you can't tell from my head, it'll fall off within a day. You know,
that's a high testosterone thing. It goes the opposite direction. So
I assure you, it's not testosterone.
I got to go lift this Toyota outside. I don't know why I picked the Toyota and not something more manly like a Buick.
Just go with the question.
Yeah. So I got a hard-hitting question for you. So
right off the bat.
Yeah. Have you ever cussed in front of a priest?
Not knowingly.
We were just trying to figure out a way to break the ice, and we're like, that's the only one I could come up with, because I actually had that experience this week of.
Oh, you did? You cussed in front of a priest?
Well, almost. I was talking to my daughters go to Catholic school, and the priest was outside, and I started talking to him, and we were talking about COVID and the face mask. And I have a tendency, we've been talking before we recorded, I have a tendency not to have a filter. And
that's a good thing for a podcaster, not so good if you're trying to make nice with a priest.
Yeah. And I said, well, this mask thing is great, but I can't wait for this. And my mouth literally just started to melt off my face.
That's a great story.
And I never finished it. I never stopped. He just looked at me and said, yeah, me too.
Yeah. I've played a priest a couple of times. You could cuss.
I know.
I'm glad you could share that, taking what little time we have.
I am so you encouraged me.
Iconoclast, Mick Garris, and you told us that wonderful story. Oh, let us kiss your ass just a little bit. Actually, I was looking at your first edition, Stephen. Is that the stand? It's up in here. I have the same version.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. We're not going to ask any stand questions, I promise.
It's quite okay.
I don't really have any, because I think most of it is...
It's out there.
It's just so easy and quiet, slow-hanging fruit. So you and I have something in common. We're both from parents who split up. And we both, I think, crawled into fantasy to deal with a lot of it.
Not knowingly, but certainly that's what happened to me. Yeah.
Yeah. At 42, I think I realize it more and more. And I think the birth of my son has helped me kind of understand that. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's scarred. In fact, I think it was the best thing that probably could have happened to me. It gave me, among some other things that I tried, it was probably the least hurtful thing for me. It was helpful. It introduced me to great cinema, filmmakers, wonderful books. So I'm curious, right off the bat, what are some of the things that you just go to make you feel better if you're having a bad day?
Well, I'm pretty much a glass half full kind of guy.
I can see that.
And I love reading noir books. I love reading, Richard Matheson, and I love reading obvious ones, Stephen King and you know, Arthur Machen and people. But I also love to go back to the comfort food of the universal classics, but you know, not. I've kind of seen Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman enough, but Frankenstein meets the Wolfman not nearly as much. Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein is the movie I've seen more than any other.
Is that your favorite film?
I would not say that. I don't really think in terms of favorites. You know, people make lists and, oh, my number one, and they shift them around. And it's like, I either like it or I don't.
I agree.
And these days, I'm not so big on rewatching or rereading. You know, I'd rather seek out something new. And for years, I've been able to go to film festivals around the world where I get to see things that we are not normally exposed to. And now that everything is online, access to international film within the genre and out of the genre is so easy. And it's thrilling to see something I haven't experienced before. And not just international stuff. The most recent movie I watched was The Burnt Orange Conspiracy, which is based on a noir author named Charles Willeford, who wrote the book Miami Blues was based on. Mm-hmm. And it's not a horror book, but it's a noir book. And Mick Jagger has a fantastic part in it. He's really good in it. And I love noir. I love twisty-turny. I love that sort of thing. And it gives me some of the same pleasure that really good horror gives me, where the dose of the unexpected is really exciting to me and nourishing and fulfilling to me. So I don't know if that answers that question. But
it does, because it kind of leads to another question I had, because I didn't want to ask you a lot of horror questions today, because I was kind of curious. I got to, so a little bit about us. We do a lot of moderation and a lot of moderating at Comic-Cons and cons and Scarefest in Lexington, all these things. I do a lot of the main stage work, and it's been great the last few years. And one of my favorite, actually the favorite panel I ever did, was with George Romero before he passed.
Oh, yeah.
And it's one of the times where I looked, you know how critical you are of yourself, right? But it's one of the times I actually watched it later and said, you know, Joe, you did a really damn good job, because I saw famous people just a month or two later do it, and they went for the zombie questions. And I promised him before, I said, I'm not going to ask you any zombie questions. He started laughing. I said, I'm not. The audience will ask you those. Yeah. I want to talk about something else. He wanted to talk about, and I guess he was sick. I knew he didn't feel well, but he wanted to talk about the ones that got away, which led to wonderful stories about him almost working with Scorsese, making a horror film in the early 80s for Disney. It's just had a great time. So I told you all that to say, I'm curious about the non-horror, maybe non-fantasy stuff that you would have liked to still do. What are maybe some books that you would love to adapt?
Well, one of the reasons that I write books is because they don't really require a budget or a schedule or actors' egos or availabilities or studio rules and test screenings and all of that. But most of the fiction that I've written, my new book is out now, and it's called These Evil Things We Do. And it's 4 novellas and a novel. Not all of them are horror. And some of them are just tinged with it. Maybe it's a ghost story, but they're very real world set. There's a couple of scripts that I wrote. One of them got me my first job on Amazing Stories, when Steven Spielberg's readers read it, and the last line of their coverage was "Hire this man." And it's called Uncle Willie. It takes place in 1959 in the San Fernando Valley, where I grew up. And it's about a kids show host who really wanted to be an actor and could never really get the big movies, so he became an afternoon cartoon show host in the 50s on a local TV channel known as Uncle Willie. So now when he goes in to do auditions, oh, Uncle Willie, my kids love you. And nobody would ever think of it, just like what happened to George Reeves with Superman. Here he was in Gone with the Wind, all these big movies, and then he did Superman and he couldn't get another job. So Uncle Willie attempts and botches a suicide and disfigures himself. So a kid in the neighborhood who's 12 years old, who's just getting to be too old for Uncle Willie, realizes he's his neighbor, and he never knew that before. And he starts to watch him come and go and eventually meets him, and they befriend one another. And it's not a horror movie at all, but it's something more deeply emotional than you would normally expect from that. So that's one. Another one I've just revisited. I rewrote a script that I wrote decades ago that has to do with evangelism, and it's a little bit magical as well. It's very cynical, but it's set in 1936 in the Midwest. And it deals with a character that not many people know about, but is true. The only way people saw sex on the screen was guys would travel around in their beat up old pickup truck with a film projector and show exploitation movies. They'd wear a white coat, pretend they were a doctor, and sell sex ed materials, and they'd four-wall it, and they'd go town by town by town, just one step ahead of the cops. People would go to see an educational film about having a baby that shows graphic sexual interplay, and that was the best you could do in 1936. And so it's about that, and it combines that with evangelism and a mentally handicapped 16-year-old who becomes the center of it.
I would love to see that. My uncle is a minister. Actually, he knew Falwell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he and Falwell were friends. I turned down a full ride to go to Liberty long time ago.
Which Falwell?
Older, dead one.
Yeah. Oh, the dead one. Okay.
He's not the pool boy. My uncle's not the pool boy.
No, it's the one that had sex with his mom in the outhouse.
That was one of many. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, one of many.
Here come the attorneys, right?
I know. That not true. All right.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Thank you.
Yeah, we're not going to dig his ass up and sue us, so go ahead, Chad.
No, so you mentioned your work on Amazing Stories.
Yeah.
And, I got to tell you, so preparing for the interview, I've been watching Amazing Stories again and, kind of revisiting how much I love it. And I have a 6 and a 4-year-old.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. And I sit down and they were curious about what I was watching, and they sit down with me and I showed them The Sitter and The Gribble, 2 of the stories that you wrote. And Mick, watching their faces on those episodes was just an amazing experience for me, especially this, The Sitter was just this morning, Mick. I got him up ready for school. And I said, do you all want to watch another Amazing Stories? And they're like, yeah, Daddy. I'm like, okay, well, there's this great one called about a babysitter, a magical babysitter. And they were just, they wouldn't eat their breakfast. They wouldn't get dressed. I had to actually pause it mid-episode, Mick.
How great.
To get them out of the, just, they were completely sucked into that. And that's, your storytelling.
Well, thank you. I mean, both of those story ideas were Spielberg's ideas, but the scripts, the scripts. Yeah. And, you get Joe Dante directing The Gribble with a Rob Bottin suit and all that stuff too. There's a lot of people who contribute to the magic, but yeah, that was kind of a period that people don't associate me with because of all of the really horrific stuff I've done for the last couple of decades. It skips over the Amblin stuff. The Battery's not included, although Hocus Pocus certainly has only grown over the years, not lessened in its popularity.
And I do want to talk about Batteries Not Included in just a little bit, but back on, I do want to. I've buttered you up with the
ones you liked, yeah.
No. I want to tell you, you're also single-handedly responsible for one of the few instances of giving me nightmares as a child.
Oh, good. That makes me proud. Which time?
Now you know why he's bald. It's all her fault.
Thanks for the extra.
Actually, he's sucking up your hair, Chad.
So go to the head of the class.
Hair vampire, yeah. Go to the head of the class.
Is by far, sir, one of the most traumatizing and scary experiences I've had watching. And I know that your story combined with Robert Zemeckis, but what was your inspiration for that story? I have to ask, because it really did. It terrified me as a kid.
There was a lot of talk about backmasking on playing records backwards and all of these rituals and things that were to summon Satan, and all of these things that were going on with Al Gore's wife, Tipper Gore, ran a campaign against horror and rock and roll and Satanism and all this nasty stuff. And so it was just a backlash on that. I came up with the story, and then I wrote it with my friend Tommy McLaughlin, who you may know from Friday the 13th. Yeah, a really great, wonderful guy and a great filmmaker. And then when they booked Zemeckis, because Spielberg went to all of his friends to direct episodes. And to be able to get Zemeckis on board after, and watching Back to the Future being shot on the same lot and all of that, it was thrilling. And he and his writing partner at the time, Bob Gale, once they came on board, of course, they're writers and they did revisions on it and the like. And they shot so much stuff that they turned it into a 1 hour episode, one of 2 1 hour episodes instead of a half hour.
With Spielberg, right?
Yes. The other one was The Mission, The Mission with
Kiefer Sutherland,
and
Casey Siemaszko.
So it was a little bit, Casey Siemaszko. But it was a little bit padded, the opening footage that he's watching on TV of the British zombie movie goes on a bit, and the House on Haunted Hill goes on a bit. Oh, and the zombie one was Mirror, Mirror. Sorry, House on Haunted Hill was in Go to the Head of the Class.
Yeah. Mirror, Mirror, that's Scorsese, right?
Scorsese, and it was originally written by the guy who wrote After Hours, Joe Minion, but everybody wanted something different from it, so I actually did a page 1 rewrite on that, and the script that Scorsese shot was the script that I wrote. And I was brand new at writing for television and being a story editor on the show. And the producers said, you don't really want to take credit on that at this point. Shit, I could have had credit as the writer on a Martin Scorsese episode. But
what a rat bastard.
But now we know.
We know.
I rewatched it too. Chad's absolutely right. It scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. And it used to play, even after the show was off, it would play on cable later as that 2 hour Amazing Stories movie.
The movie, yeah.
Yeah, you're right, if you guys remember. But that shot, the opening shot, and Robert Zemeckis is a genius. But it's right out of Back to the it's the same opening shot from Back to the Future. It's the same opening shot. It's just in a different room, right?
Yeah. No, he did an amazing job. And, the first thing that I ever wrote that ever got produced was an episode of Amazing Stories, the main attraction, the magnet. And to watch that and Mirror, Mirror, to be on the set, watching Martin Scorsese directing Sam Waterston, doing dialogue that I wrote. It's like, imagine that feeling. It was just like Stephen King and I were going to do Rose Red with Spielberg. And so I met King at his hotel, and they had sent a limo to take us to the Universal lot. And we're driving up to the gate at Universal, and King says to me, wow, what would those people outside say if they knew we were going to meet with Steven Spielberg? And I said, Steve, what would people say if they knew I was with Stephen King going to meet with It was like, being the Zelig of horror.
Yeah, but you kind of are 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon when it comes to that. I mean...
Yeah, like 1 degree.
Yeah, you really are. Only 1 degree.
I'm 2 degrees from Kevin Bacon because he was in Animal House with John Landis directing.
So what happened with Rose Red? Because that was ultimately made with Craig Baxley, right?
Yeah. Craig did a bunch of the
Which is a great... I love the first 2 nights.
Yeah.
That third night kind of...
It's awfully long, and it was hugely expensive. It was a $40 million miniseries, and it looks it. But originally, it was a feature script that King had written, and Spielberg had script problems with it. And he felt, here's an 800-pound gorilla on either side. I'm a 50-pound chimp in the middle. And they basically agreed to disagree and not make the movie. And issues that Spielberg had with that script were logic and character-based, things like that. And things that when they remade The Haunting, it was exactly everything that Spielberg thought was wrong with Rose Red put into The Haunting remake.
Well, go ahead. I thought that was what they were originally going to do, was a remake with The Haunting with Stephen King writing it, correct?
No, he did an original, and it was inspired by The Haunting, I'm sure, because it was, that kind of ghost story. But so 5 years later, when King got the rights back after the option ran out with Amblin for a movie, they decided to do it as a miniseries, and I wasn't available, so Craig Baxley and Steve did a handful of movies together too for television.
One really good one, Storm of the Century.
Yes, Storm of the Century was
Not
one.
that this is any of your work. I just really like Storm of the Century.
No, it was offered to me, and I was busy developing Desperation as a feature and couldn't take it on.
And by the way, I didn't actually.
That's the one that cost. Sorry, that's the one that cost $40 million. Rose Red was not that expensive. Storm of the Century was outrageously expensive.
But it's beautiful. And that's one where King often, and I didn't mean to talk about Stephen King, but this is great. This is the reason why you have a conversation and see where it goes, right? Yeah. So with Stephen, you know, a lot of the criticism is that about the final or the third act or how it ends. A lot of it and some of it I understand, but Storm of the Century has one of those endings that I think is perfect, and I don't know how anyone could ever complain about.
Well, Steve once said to me when we were making Sleepwalkers, he said, "I'm not very good at endings," and I said, "You know, that's really not true." But in the case of Sleepwalkers, it was an original screenplay, and the studio was not satisfied with the ending. And so I said, if we're going to do a reshoot, let's do something for the opening that explains it a little bit more so you understand it better. So the opening scene with Mark Hamill was not in the original script.
Oh.
And the ending scene with the Machen in the car, that did not originally end. It ended earlier. And so I offered to do it, and I wrote the opening scene and King wrote the ending scene, because I said, if we're going to do a reshoot, please let me do something at the front. And of course everything had to meet with King's approval, and so it's much more potent the way it is now than the way it originally said.
Yeah, because it sets up everything. I saw that in the theater opening night Friday. Let's see, I'm 42, so I was probably too young. But God bless that. Remember the divorce? They used to drop me off quite a bit, and that was the great thing. Mom would drop me off, which was fantastic. And I also heard or read that you're the one that came up with the opening, right, for the credits.
With the
history of the Sleepwalkers. That was your idea.
Yeah, the Chillicothe Encyclopedia of Supernatural Knowledge. Yeah, that was something I came up with, and I wrote that title card, and then King said, let me make a few tweaks to it. So he did a little adjusting on it, but that alone explained things that are not explained in the movie at all.
No, it helps quite a bit, and I think Sleepwalkers is underrated. Sorry, James.
No. Well, James, before you go, side note real quick, Joe talked about how he was introduced to Sleepwalkers. Let me tell you how I was introduced to Sleepwalkers. I on VHS with my mom.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That was the second chapter in my motherfucker trilogy. It's not been completed yet. Yeah.
Well, that's going to lead to an odd segue to my question.
Yeah, go for it, James.
Go ahead. Try to top that, James.
Well, no, actually, you've mentioned in other interviews that one of the things that your mother allowed you to read comic books, encouraged it because you were reading. My mother had the same exact approach. So when I heard that in an interview, I was like, well, I've got to ask, what were you reading? What sort of comic books attracted you? And what did that echo forward as you went on?
There weren't really that many horror comics when I was a kid. I was after the ECs, so I never was really exposed to them. There were occasional things that, like the Carlton comics, they were kind of a really third-rate comic book company with second-rate writers and artists, but they were unafraid of doing horror. However, the Comics Code was in full play by the time I was reading comics. So they were heavily censored. But I read DC. I didn't read Marvel comics when I was a kid. I read all the DC stuff. And so I loved Superman and the Bizarro world and the Joker and all that stuff. And I didn't really read the funny books. My sister liked all the Disney comics, the Golden Key comics. But mostly I read DC, and I drew before I started writing. My father had been an art student, very, very good at it, but never was able to make his living doing art. And so that was the first thing I did and showed any ability with. But once I started writing around the age of 12, I quit drawing. But I loved the comic form at that time. Less so interested since I've been a filmmaker, because movement and dialogue and pacing and all of that is so much more of storytelling than looking at panel by panel. I have a lot of respect for that, but I rarely read them these days.
With that, and kind of you talking about these evil things we do, and obviously doing screenplays and the comics being in the background, is there a different way you approach when you think about writing a novella, a novel, versus a screenplay? And then how does that kind of play out? You know, have you ever sat down to write one and it be like, well, this needs to be the other?
In the thinking stage, not so much once I start writing something. There is a difference in the process in one way. In most ways, it's the same. I sit down and try and entertain myself. But I also have a love of language and a love of words and a playful use of words that in my fiction, I'm allowed to do that because I'm weaving atmosphere, I'm weaving emotions, I'm getting, I mention this a lot in interviews, but one of the greatest impressions I got about writing was from Richard Matheson when he was working on Amazing Stories. And he said to me, fiction is internal and film is external. And there's a huge difference in that when you're writing for the page, the love of language gives you, you're painting with words. And you're reading words in a way that you don't want to bore the reader. You want them to be entertaining. You know, my fiction is, if you've read the books or anything, that it's a playful use of language, even when it's deadly serious. But when you're writing a screenplay, you're writing a blueprint. But still, the point is to get the reader to want to turn the page to the next page. So even my screenwriting may be a little bit overwritten, but in a way to keep atmosphere and tension and try and have the experience of watching a movie rather than just a blueprint that everybody's going to be working off of. So the process is the same. I'll come in the morning and write a bunch of pages, have lunch and write a couple of pages and done for the rest of the day. But it's the same process of typing at my keyboard and all of that. But in a way, it's more entertaining to me to write the fiction because I'm using words that the reader will be reading as well, rather than just saying he walks in the door and goes to the window and throws a chicken under the car, you know, something like that. You do it playfully. There. That's the scene in my next movie. That's the opening.
Love it. Coming from a vegan, it's hilarious.
Well, and I managed to bring this author up once per episode, so I've got to squeeze it in.
Oh, David, don't you stare. You're going to steal my next question.
Well, you interviewed years ago Harlan Ellison, and Harlan Ellison has that great line, write for yourself, get a job to do, get a job to make a living, but write for yourself. So when you were talking about, are you entertaining yourself, it automatically cued that quote up in my head.
Yeah.
So anyway, I also just want to say thank you for the Ellison interview. Joe, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Well, James and I have everybody who ever met Ellison should have an Ellison story. And I had another question lined up, but I'll go with it. Of James and I have an Ellison story. We're not going to tell it. We'll tell it to you someday if we ever. You should come to Scarefest. We'll totally do your panel. I actually like what you do when you go to conventions. Because you can watch it on social media. You explore places and you use it as to travel. And we've talked about if we got to do more than just our few hundred miles where we kind of cover. That's what we would do. We would get there a day early and enjoy and view things. But
absolutely,
you have a good Harlan Ellison story. James got hit and I got cursed out, which I knew I was about to get. But do you have because that interview went really well.
Well, we were friends, yeah. Years ago. Yeah, I've got several Harlan stories.
We had Peter David. Peter David did almost 3 hours. I don't know if you know who Peter David is, the writer. He's a
Yeah.
comic book writer. He and Ellison are really close. He did almost 3 hours with us, and he goes, "Which one do you want to know?"
Right. Well, like Josh Olson is a friend, the
Josh Olson,
screenwriter and podcaster. He and Harlan were as close as two people could be without being lovers.
That we
And
know of.
so, yeah, that we know. But
Allegedly.
no, Josh is a great guy and has nothing but respect for Harlan. And I have a lot of respect for Harlan, but he could be a pain in the ass too.
He's a curmudgeon.
Yeah,
at
curmudgeon. I think he was proudly curmudgeonly.
At
But
best.
one story I had, this was before I married Cynthia, and I was doing publicity at Universal, and I put together a screening of The Thing,
Uh-huh.
and invited Harlan and other people. And it was a big screening, first time it was going to be seen by an audience. And so I'm sitting there, and I had a date with me, a beautiful young woman. And so I'm sitting there, and then Harlan and his date come and sit down and go, "Wait, are you tall? Are you going to slump through the whole thing?" Because I'm 6 feet tall, and Harlan was famously not. So he, yeah.
Very short.
So he was kind of joking and kind of not. And so I said, "Don't worry, Harlan." "Oh, Mick. Oh, it's Mick. Okay, good. But you're going to slump, right?" And said, "Don't worry, I will. Not a problem." And so he was just kind of saying wise ass jokes and stuff.
Mhm.
And then one thing was, "Who's this? Wow, your date is beautiful. She's much too good for you." And I turned around to Harlan, and it's the one time I did something you always think of, "Oh, if only I had done."
Yep.
I turned around to Harlan. I said, "Harlan, I have never been anything but supportive of you and tell people how great you are and get you into screenings, do these things. That really hurts." And so later I went to the restroom, and he leaned over to my date and said, "I'm so sorry. I was kidding, right? I was kidding." And it was like Harlan in apology mode, which you never see. And of course, he didn't say it to me. He said,
No, of course not.
but yeah, that's my Harlan story for now.
Oh yeah, he's one of the greatest writers of all time.
He was great and a brilliant guy, and his
But-
columns for the LA Weekly were, or the LA Free Press were.
the
really-
glass teat.
Yeah, the Glass Teat was fantastic. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I mean, really great stuff.
But sorry, Chad, go ahead. Oh, I thought you were about to ask something.
No, well, I can.
Well,
Yeah,
no, you look
I
like
like
you were
how your
leaning in.
microphone lights up when you're on. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think he turns it off and on just to get attention. But yeah, sorry.
So, back into your filmmaking career, because I don't know if you guys, I don't know if you realize this, with Mick Garris, Bonehead Weekly has officially become the greatest resource for Critters 2. We have talked to production designer Mick Strawn,
Great guy.
special effects Andre Ellingson, and creature and special effects wizard prop master Michael Moore.
Yeah.
Yes.
And each one has told us a Critters 2 story. So I know you probably get this question a lot, but I just want just one Critters 2 story.
Before you start, a little background.
Yeah.
Mick Strawn, the production designer, is a dear friend of ours and actually made a lot of connection for us a few years ago. And
Yes.
it's been wonderful. And he's been on the show several times and we talk a lot. But he has a Critters 2 story that I may send you that I don't know that you know if he's ever told you about an explosion on set.
Oh, well, I have one about an explosion at the hamburger factory.
You go right ahead.
Oh,
We're ready to go.
yeah.
Well, we had a special effects guy named Marty Breslin.
Mhm.
No, was that? Yeah, that's his name. I'm pretty sure. I don't want to denigrate anyone's work. Big burly guy, this is going to be great. It's good. And we were blowing up the hamburger factory.
Yeah.
So he's kind of a blustery guy and say, "Hey, here, you take the button, you blow it." And I said, "That's okay, Marty. You are a professional. You're the one with the ammo license, all of that stuff. So you do." No, it'll be fun. You'll do it. And so he gave me the button and we're counting down and I hit it and nothing happened. And so we did it again and I hit it and nothing happens. Finally figures it out. And for the third time, I hit it and the first thing blows like crazy. It's beautiful. but it's supposed to blow again and again and again. But that explosion burned up the wires that triggered the other explosions, which he had not planned for. So that's why you see us recut from different angles, the same explosion happening over and over and over. So that's my
Joe, I will let you tell Mick.
No. Q Chad. Mick Ron has the other side of that story.
Yes.
Of why that didn't blow 2 times.
Mick, we need to send you that audio clip.
You can tell.
Well, apparently he was himself, not Mick, but the other one was being a little bit of a not a nice person.
A dick.
There you go. He was being a dick. And they were having a conversation.
Okay, then bleep my mention of his name.
No. I think it's fine because I can't remember. We just know Mick, and I can't remember the other guy's name either. But I need to go back and re-listen to it because actually I never. Do you listen to your podcast later on? I think after it's all said and done, I may go back. But people ask me questions, and I now know what it's like to be asked. Shatner, what it must be like to be asked. What was that like in 1970? Well, I have no damn clue. I don't remember. I don't listen to myself or go back and watch anything.
No, you experience it once, and
it's kind of over. And if I go back, I just hear what I should have said and what I should have asked and where it should have went.
Well, and for me, I'm there for the guests. I'm there to be the audience as well. I'm supposed to be the eyes and the ears of the audience.
Right.
Get information out. It's not the Mick Garris show. It's the podcast interviewing these people.
Exactly.
Right.
And I learn something from everyone, which is why I do it. It's certainly not to make a living because, as you well know, podcasting is not lucrative unless you're Adam Carolla or somebody.
Oh, well, yeah, but the secret to he didn't give it me, but he did give the one piece of advice. The secret to any successful podcast is to be famous first.
Yes, exactly. And I started out at Podcast One, which is mostly radio and TV stars doing them. They asked me to do a podcast, and it was like, we had beautiful facilities and we did it well, but they didn't know how to deal with our niche audience.
No, I completely understand that, which leads me to another question, because Glenn asked several questions that I wanted to ask when you were on Good Movie Monday a couple of weeks ago. And he's a rat bastard Australian who stole a couple of my questions. And I hope he listens to this later on. He's a very nice person, actually.
Very nice.
I appreciate him for finally getting this done so we could talk.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't not do this after all the nice things you said on his show.
Well, yes, it was a kiss-ass no, but we meant it.
I meant every word of it.
Psycho 4 is truly, there's no reason Psycho 4 should be that good because it's Psycho 4.
No,
I don't mean that in any disrespect, sir. But
no, and I don't do it out of ego, but I always tell people it's better than any movie with a number 4 in the title has any right to.
Has any right to be. It has so many layers. It works so well. I watched it, once again, remember that whole divorce, got a lot of freedom, no latchkey kid. I watched it on Showtime when it premiered.
Ah, wow, 1990.
Yeah. Which, while I'm talking about it, I want to ask you a question. My mother grew up in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and I didn't realize till I was listening to that you actually shot it in Orlando. So I'm assuming you shot it when they were building Universal Studios. They just built Universal Studios there, correct?
They had built it. It hadn't opened yet, and they were. The commissary was getting its practice together before they opened, so we would get our meals at the commissary for like 10% of the cost, because it was giving them practice to get it in shape as a cafeteria. And it opened while we were still shooting. And I think that's one of the reasons that Universal had us shoot there, because it would be an actual attraction. Come to Universal Studios, Florida, and see a movie being made. And it was a franchise. People know who Tony Perkins is. People knew who what Psycho was.
They built a house there on the lot.
Yeah, using the same blueprints, the house and the motel. And so we had the luxury of doing that, but I think we were intended more as a theme park attraction than as a production. So we had a lot to deal with. There's a very emotional scene between Henry Thomas and Olivia Hussey outside the house by where she's pounding carpets on the clothesline. Just 50 feet away, there's a police tape with 100 tourists gawking and watching this thing while it's this very emotional breakdown between mother and son. Yeah.
Was it? Did you shoot it in '89? Because if it was the summer of '90, I could have been. There could have been a short little fat kid walking right by. It would have been me because I went that summer opening.
Then we shot it. We ended, I think, July 3rd.
Yeah,
Wow.
it could have been. It started triggering these memories in my mind because I got to go to that opening because we went to see my grandmother that summer. Wow. Sorry, anyway.
We're shooting, and you just passed us by.
I just passed. Okay. But we just have such a love of Psycho 4, Critters 2, being
Critters
the best
2.
Easter movie ever made.
You stole my line.
A whole lot of competition,
Yeah. But I do got to ask about Psycho 4 because, you famously, you got, or from hearing previous interviews with you, you got a lot of the same props from the original. Like, for example, the mother's bed. You got that for the movie, and it was like insured. But being
for $100,000,
yeah, being a cinephile like us. Like, for example, I got to go to Michael Moore. I mentioned him. He let me come to his his prop house in Hollywood. And it was one of the best and most dorky experiences of my life. I actually got to hold an original tricorder, and from the show. And so, but, going on set in Psycho 4, did you ever geek out a little bit? Like, did you sit on the edge of the bed and just jump up and down and go, tee?
Oh, I was in heaven the whole time. I mean, to actually, first of all, Hilton Green, who was my producer, was Hitchcock's first AD on the original Psycho.
Oh.
A wonderful man who used to head up physical production at Universal. And Tony Perkins, for all of the complications of working with him, it was a thrill, and he was a terrific guy. But all of these pieces, and I have, candy corn bags that were made off of the original print template on the original movie that they printed up for us. So that is what I've got. I actually have Mother's corpse. You can't see it, but it's on the other side of my office here, sitting in my director's chair from Psycho 4 with the prop butcher knife in her hands.
That's amazing.
When this interview's over, you are going to turn that, right? We're just going to
Well, I'm on a desktop here.
Oh, fine, whatever.
But I'll take a picture of it and send it to you so you can.
That I appreciate. I'm sorry. I was just about to ask because earlier I was going to say Glenn stole a lot of my questions, especially when it came to the Z channel and starting out. And I was watching you the other day, and I love the Freakin' one.
Oh, it never aired.
Right.
I know. And then when I started, I didn't know that till I listened to you on Gilbert Gottfried that it never aired, that's just your version. And as much as he just shits on Exorcist 2, which it is a bad movie, although I think Exorcist 3, I'm with you. It's based on Legion. It's written and directed by William Peter Blatty. If you ever read the Legion book, it's a fairly faithful adaptation to his book. And Brad Dourif just kicks just so much ass in that movie. Just steals the movie. Just steals the movie. Has one great jump scare. I think Exorcist 3 is a really good movie. But
I actually like Exorcist 2, even though it's not a great movie. I like it.
Really?
Yeah.
It's judgmental. You're the filmmaker, but
it's so bonkers. Well, not as a filmmaker, just as, it tries so hard to not repeat The Exorcist. And Richard Burton's performance is so weird, and there are just amazing visuals in there. The photography by William Fraker in Exorcist 2 is really striking and remarkable.
I'm going to have to go back and rewatch it. It's been a long.
I'm not recommending it as a movie. But
No. I would have to go back. It's Borman, right? So I'd need to go back and rewatch it and see if I find any of that in there. I could just remember watching it as a young man, almost falling asleep several times setting through it.
Yeah, it's not a propulsive thriller.
So
but it's definitely worth seeing. Anyway, enough.
Back to Freakin'. No. We've had some, as our friend Glenn, whom you've met, would use the word prickly pears. We've had a couple. One, there was a few weeks ago, and we got through. Actually, we buttered him up a little bit, and we got through it because you want to get, like you said earlier, you want to get the best out of someone. and I know that you probably have no memory of this, but watching it as someone who's probably novice and doesn't do it as much as you do, interview him and say, so are those people that say, and then he gets pissed. Who are they? Who are they?
Yeah.
And you're a very young man. So
I was a total novice. I was much more of a novice than you guys.
I was watching it again and just watching you be. Do you have recollection of? Do you remember it?
Oh, I sweat thinking about it.
Do you really? Because you were looking. It's like, well, there, and you don't have the names either.
No, I didn't have the names. It was something I thought was worth bringing up because I had read a couple of reviews that felt like it was really exploitive, and in some ways it is. But
yeah, of course,
the fact that the movie is one of a kind and fantastic and iconic and and the point was to get conversation. I had done print interviews before, but not TV.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'd been performing in a band as a lead singer.
Horse feathers.
Totally, which it was totally different from sitting and doing it in front of a TV camera and feeling so awkward looking at the camera, making introductions like this rather than now I'm looking at you. There, I'm looking at the camera.
Yeah, right.
And so doing that for television where it's just me and this guy who's made this iconic, phenomenal movie as well as others before it.
Right.
And just being naive and asking a question. And I've since interviewed him again on the Postmortem TV show 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot more fun. And I was more able to ask questions in a way that did not make him defensive. And knew better than to even try something like that and still get really good information without feeling like I'm kind of catering to self-censorship. But yeah, I remember it very well. It was like inside. I don't know what it looked like outside, but I was a nervous wreck when that happened.
Well, it just makes me, even at 42 and having a professional career, because you have to make a living outside of this, it just made me smile. About how things can become just a clusterfuck and a shit show so quickly. And it's happened to me on stage.
27 or 28 when that happened.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's happened to me on stage, moderating. There's 300 or 400 people and somebody will get up. Either I'll take it away that they didn't necessarily want to go. And it's the reason why we ask you, is there anything you don't want to talk about? Anything you do want to talk about? You always try to prepare, right? And it's just nice. It made my day watching it. So, yeah. Chad,
I squirmed like crazy. Yeah, I squirmed more than a Jeff Lieberman movie.
And his Sorcerer, as much as I love the Exorcist, the Sorcerer is one of a kind.
I love Sorcerer, and I like it more than Wages of Fear, the original. People who saw that first would argue with me because I saw Sorcerer first, but I saw it at the Chinese Theater on opening weekend, the same place that played The Exorcist, the same place that in fact, Sorcerer replaced Star Wars at the Chinese Theater. And it did so poorly that it got booted the next week to another theater, and they put Star Wars back.
Well, Josh Olson has a great quote when he does on Trailers from Hell. I think he's the one, he did a Sorcerer Trailers from Hell, and he says, I like to believe there's a reality where there was a little B movie that came out that summer that people remember fondly called Star Wars, and Sorcerer was the huge film, that there's an alternate reality, and cinema took a drastic change for the next 40 years.
Well, it's interesting because giving it that title Sorcerer, and at that time on the side of the Chinese Theater, they'd do huge paintings of the posters for that. There's Sorcerer on there. It had just played The Exorcist, or Star Wars.
Star Wars.
You know, Sorcerer from the director of The Exorcist. You do not expect what kind of movie it is.
You don't know it's named after a fucking truck.
Exactly.
I read his book, and I still don't know that I understand why he named it Sorcerer.
Yeah, it may have been a commercial nod to his past with The Exorcist, but I don't know. But I do know it's a masterpiece. I love that.
Yeah, it is. It is fantastic. It's where a director kind of like a Werner Herzog goes crazy, and we're getting this done in the middle of the jungle by God.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry.
What Friedkin wants, Friedkin gets.
Absolutely. And Chad, go ahead with your question. I was about to go off.
Oh, no, it's okay. Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I got 3 really that I'm dying to ask, but
go ahead.
You know, I'm going to ask about horror filmmaking in general. We have seen just an evolution of horror. You know, back in the 80s and early 90s when we were watching horror, you know, it was kind of, you know, it wasn't mainstay. It wasn't, you know, something. It was kind of, as Bruce Campbell would say, I believe it was Bruce Campbell. Correct me if I'm wrong, Joe. That working in horror was kind of like you might as well have been doing porn.
It was about a notch above porno.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially in the 80s.
Yeah, and it was
right here above porno. There's porn, and here was horror.
And, you know, we hear the same. I believe Quentin Tarantino said you can look at horror to determine, Joe, right? You can look at horror and determine what decade you're in or the time frame we're in.
Westerns, especially.
Westerns
are the greatest of. This is a 70s Western. This is a 50s Western.
But, you know, and currently we're in this insurgence of really deep psychological horror films like Jordan Peele and Get Out, Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, Jennifer Kent with Babadook, and Babadook is jarring.
It's so good.
It is amazing.
The Invitation by Karin Kusama. A Dark Song.
I just watched A Dark Song 3 weeks ago. James bought it for me. I do a review for Scarefest, our local horror convention, and it's weekly, and I'd never seen it, and I enjoyed it quite a bit.
It's pretty amazing. And the Freaks on Netflix is great. The Ritual. Yeah. I mean, there's so much.
Oh, The Ritual, yeah.
There's grown-up horror. And I refuse to use the term elevated horror because I think it cheapens everything in the genre.
It really does.
But horror was never intended for teenagers. You know, it was always a dramatic form throughout the history of literature and cinema. And outside of the US and outside of the studios, there is plenty of horror that's meant for grown-ups. Mm-hmm. And if you're talking about the major studios, you know, it's teen horror and PG-13, you know, franchises. And I think that is the absolute nadir of horror.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I answered your question or if you.
I was just kind of curious of where you think the next level, the next stage is going to go, because I don't think anybody saw like the Babadook, The Invitation. The Invitation is crazy. It's almost 2 movies put into one story. You do not see it going in the way that it did in Midsommar.
It's perfect. I've seen The Invitation 3 times, and every time I see it, it's like seeing it fresh. You know.
Yeah, you catch something new. I've watched it. I haven't watched it 3. I've watched it twice because that first time I watched it, I sit there and I was, what did I just watch?
Yeah.
And I just had to watch it again to catch these, to see if there was like pieces that I was missing. And
you know, as far as where it's going to go, whatever is a big success will get a lot of people imitating it.
Yeah.
And then there will be sequels to it. And, you know, on that level. But the great thing about the era we live in, it's the great and the bad thing about where we live, when we live, is that all of it is available to us instantly. You know, the opportunity to watch great independent horror movies in a theater is pretty much dead. If it can't justify a giant box office, nobody's going to run a campaign for an independent horror movie that's really original and aimed at adults. Yep. Because they're just not going to get it. Kids go to the movies to see it, and great. But I think even young people can appreciate an intelligent, well-told, frightening story, supernatural or otherwise. So I think it would be folly to even attempt to guess where it's going to go. But the good news is horror has never been more diverse. And I don't mean by gender or by ethnicity, but just in its styles. There are ghost stories, there are psychological horrors, there are monster movies, there's, you know, just all kinds of fables and everything you can think of, and people do. So in a way, horror has become much more inexpensive to make because the tools you can use, Steven Soderbergh used an iPhone 7 to shoot Unsane, you know, and it looked great and played in theaters and was beautiful and fantastic. So the good news and the bad news, anybody can make a movie. Yeah. So that's great news if you're really talented and have the people with you to make something special, like Host. Host is fantastic. And that's all done just like we're doing this on Zoom.
I haven't got to see it yet. I just actually got a subscription to Shudder.
It's great. Now you can see Nightmare Cinema as often as you like.
We'll do a plug at the end, I promise.
Yeah, it's okay. You know, there's so many different ways of telling horror, and now you can consume it. Either, you know, I'm looking at you on a 27-inch iMac, but I have an 86-inch screen in the house with surround sound and all of that stuff. And you can watch it in 4K, all of that. Or, you know, I'm not a guy who watches on an iPad or an iPhone. I'll watch it on an iPad on an airplane if we ever fly again.
Right.
But, you know, you're able to see really great stuff from around the world at the click of a button. And how great is that?
It's fantastic, but the issue is it's never been easier, but it's never been harder to make money at it.
That's really true. That's really true. And I can tell you, even through Nightmare Cinema, as high profile as that was, it was almost entirely watched online. And it's really difficult. That was a very low budget movie, but it's very difficult to make its money back.
We actually got it, and it played our Halloween festival last year.
Oh, great. Awesome.
Which is like, so there you go. We gave you a few shekels.
Yay.
Now,
but we probably gave it to you for the festival.
No, it wasn't. No. We purchased. It's our own little. We invite a few people over. We do a Halloween marathon, and we always pick a selection. And of course, you got picked.
Oh,
but and Chad, I know you have a couple, and I know we're probably running low on time, but I've got to ask about two things, and then we can come back. Mick, just let us know whenever we need to start wrapping up.
I want to make sure Chad gets his two questions.
But real quick, Riding the Bullet.
Yeah.
I know it's a Stephen King novella or short story.
Short story, yeah.
It's a Mick Garris film. And what I mean by that is I know that's based on that source material, but The Stand is Stephen King's The Stand. I think Riding the Bullet is Mick Garris's Riding the Bullet. Do you understand when I'm saying that? And I've posted online before, and I don't know. I truly think it's your most personal film. You changed it to the 60s, which makes a lot more sense of him hitchhiking. But I've got to ask you, and you may not even know, but where emotionally did it connect, and where did it come from to make it so personal? Because I'm a huge King fan. We've done several episodes on him. I got him to sign my Creep Show. Long story short, I'm a huge fan, but that's Mick Garris's Riding the Bullet.
Yeah. Well, if you've noticed, it's the only time in my entire career I've ever taken a film by credit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because, yes, the 30-page story it was based on was Stephen King's, but that story ends halfway into the screenplay.
Right.
And setting it in a different time, even though that was college. I graduated high school in 1969.
Mm-hmm.
When I read that, I had lost two brothers. No, one of my brothers had not passed away yet, but one had. And my father. And having experienced death, having told stories about death and horror and monsters and how playful it is, and how when it hits you personally, that it's not so much fun.
Yeah.
It's more meaningful than that. It's the end of a life of someone who you cared about, who was deeply involved in your own life. Mm-hmm. That story resonated with me because of that life and death choice, that Sophie's choice that the character had to make. So I felt, equating it with 1969, that's 30 years earlier than when the story was written and published in 99. So at that time, we were in the thick of Vietnam. The world was also facing a life and death choice and did not choose particularly wisely at the time. But there was a lot of upheaval. And so I thought equating this personal choice of life and death with a societal choice of life and death was important. And, you know, having experienced the loss of two brothers, both my parents now, a sister since then, it just felt like something I needed to tell, you know, and I enjoy sharing pain in art. You know, when you write a horror story or a film or a novel or whatever, you want to connect with people on a personal level and on a visceral level. You want to go places that you would be afraid to bare your soul publicly, but to do it in a movie through actors conveying emotions that are not otherwise expressed. You know, the movie was by far my least successful film I've ever done, but I still get letters from people like, I just lost my mother recently and I saw Riding the Bullet and I really identified with it. That makes it all worthwhile. You know, it was a $5 million movie, very inexpensively made, but with a cast who really cared. And I was very, very passionate about it. It took a lot to get it made. My agents thought when I wrote the spec script that they were going to sell it to the studios for a fortune. That didn't happen. It was much too, you know, well, is it The Shining or is it Stand By Me? And I said, why can't it be both?
Yeah.
Right.
So there's a long story of why it resonated.
No, it makes sense. I watched it when it came out. I loved it. I have the copy of it over here on my shelf.
Oh, thank you.
He said, "Shut up, Chad." And then
It's downstairs on my shelf because I've.
It's funny that you get those letters because a few years ago I got really sick and was in the ICU for a week and serious pneumonia. It doesn't matter. I'm fine now.
That's good news.
It was on Buried at 3 a.m. AMC when they do the Monster Fest.
Oh, wow.
And I hadn't watched it in a long time, and it just hit me. Even though I loved it, it hit me all over again. It was like reviewing it, 2 a.m. by myself, face covered with the thing on, just being able to do this. It just hit me in a totally different way. And I never thought I'd ever be able to tell you that. So
well, that means a lot to me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's your most personal film, and I've always really appreciated it. As much as I love Desperation, the book, and I have tons of questions. Chad, go ahead.
Yeah,
you got segue. This is getting too fucking sappy.
No. Yeah, so
that's the other thing people don't recognize about the possibilities of horror. It's the ability to get in touch with an emotional base. Fear is so important and visceral to us, and it comes from our hearts as much as anything else. The fear of death is the most obvious one, but fear of relationships and fear of committal and the ability to be open about it. You know, it takes some bravery to write or make films about something really personal. And to wear your heart on your sleeve, as Riding the Bullet does, it may not have made for a successful film financially, but at least it's something that people who are experiencing something similar can identify with. And I've gotten feedback that's incredibly gratifying despite its failure at the box office.
Not well.
And critics didn't like it either. So
who gives a shit?
Well, I can't.
Yeah, you can. It's they didn't like the
thing. Shall I share with you my favorite bad criticism of my work?
Oh, please do.
Jesus, yes.
A reviewer, and I don't remember who it was, but I remember the words. When Psycho 4 came out, the critic said, "Director Garris is to Hitchcock what Peoria is to Paris." It's a good line.
It is.
Unfortunately, it's an arrow in my back.
But that's the problem with a lot of criticism is it's much more about good writing than it is good criticism.
Yeah, which is fine.
Yeah.
And if you do work for public consumption, you have to have the hide of a rhinoceros.
Right.
That's oh my God! You should see some of the remarks we've gotten. We're nobody. It's like, is the fat guy going to shut up? Sorry.
I can imagine. I've gotten some real shit.
Ugh.
There are a lot of Kubrick fans who hate my guts. So
I don't understand that.
Go figure.
I don't understand that at all because I don't understand why they can't both exist.
They're both on the shelf right next to each other.
Right. Stephen King's right. You didn't fuck up the book. The book is still right over there on the shelf.
That's
Your
right.
movie is right there across from Kubrick's. Who cares?
That's right. Yeah.
And I think the people who love Kubrick have never read the book.
Well, that's that's another thing for discussion. You know, when it came out, the critics did not like the movie at all because most of them had read the book, which is a huge bestseller.
Yeah.
And the emotional core that is the King book is not represented in the Kubrick film. So they're two entirely different works of art, and they both work on their own terms. But you know, King is warm and Kubrick is cold.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
My wife could never get past Wendy Torrance. It's just she didn't watch it till later in life, till I introduced it to her, and she's like, she's so weak that just it pissed her off as a woman.
Yeah, she's hard to take in 2020.
Yeah.
And even when we made The Shining in 1997, that was a character that was so outdated and outmoded. Maybe even in 1980, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, well. You did not have that problem in your movie. Go ahead, Chad.
No.
So speaking of Joe's wife and alluding to me, look, that is a horrible segue.
Actually, I thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah. No.
Leave the money on the counter.
I'll find out if it works or not when I hear the question.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, and you listened to us talk, but batteries not included. Is seriously, Mick, one of those magical moments of me as a kid. You know, just seeing that movie, and I know you came up with the story, and then Brad Bird.
Well, here's how that happened.
Yeah, please do.
Spielberg actually wrote it as a story idea for Amazing Stories.
Okay.
And so I was going to write it, and then he said, we're going to make a movie. I want you to write a feature for me because I'm really happy with the work you've done on Amazing Stories. We're going to do either Ghost Kid or Batteries Not Included, which was originally called Grammy and Gramps and Company in the Spielberg 2 pages outline.
Nice.
I want to hear about Ghost Kid when you're done, but please.
Yeah.
I'll give you a little piece of my experience and what it became. But I chose Batteries Not Included. And so I wrote the script, and this is bearing my soul in an embarrassing way, but my script was 140 pages long.
Wow.
Most scripts are around 100.
Right.
And so I really put my heart and soul into it. My first feature assignment from Steven Spielberg.
Right.
And so he read it. And afterwards he said, you know, there's a lot of good stuff here, but I got to tell you, it took me 3 sittings to read it. And that's not good news. So I panicked. I went home and did a rewrite, cut out 30, 35 pages, and really worked on it because, you know, I'm a writer, an author, and so I was writing more than what was necessary, as we talked about before, for the blueprint.
And he's Spielberg.
And he's Spielberg, and he was my first boss ever to hire me as a screenwriter. So then he was very happy with my second draft, and it got greenlit by the studio. And then when he brought in Matthew Robbins to direct, Matthew is also a writer and had written Sugarland Express, which Spielberg directed.
Right.
And Hal Barwood, his writing partner, Matthew and Hal. And Matthew had done the Magnet Kid, the main attraction episode of Amazing Stories, and brought in as his rewriter partner, Brad Bird. So it started there, and then the same thing happened. I wrote Batteries Not Included, and then Matthew got the gig to direct it and brought in Brad Bird for the 2 of them to do a rewrite. So it happened twice with the same people.
Wow.
And then, you know, you petition the Writers Guild who gets credit on a screenplay, and then they give it to various writers to read without the author's names on any of the scripts or drafts. And Stephen was kind enough to say, look, you can have full story credit. I'm not going to pursue story credit with this because, you know, Matthew and Brad are coming in and doing rewrites, but your script got the green light and so much of it still remains. You were such a major part of this that I want you to have full story credit, so that's the story behind that. But yeah, it was also the same year that I wrote Hocus Pocus, which I wrote 8 years before it was ever produced. So I was in my Spielberg, Disney kind of family friendly, fantastical films of that era.
That's Amazing. Yeah. So no, but then thank you for writing. Seriously, Battery. And Joe, the reason I mentioned Joe's wife is it's also a staple from her childhood, as it is mine. That was one of those VHS tapes that I wore out just because I could not get enough of it. It was an amazing, and the ensemble cast was amazing. I love any movie with an ensemble cast that works well together. Automatically sucks me in.
Well, they did a great job. I never visited the set. It was done in New York and on so I didn't get to feel close to it, at least on Hocus Pocus. The first day of shooting, I was there. and that was a great experience. But there were 11 writers on that after I left. So.
How much of it is yours still?
Enough of it to get 3 credits, mostly. You know, they had 11 other writers, and it kind of reverted back to what I had written. And then they brought in Stephen Haft to do a comedy polish, to put in more gags and jokes and the like. But the major structural difference is the kids are 16 and I wrote 12-year-olds because it's a much more potent holiday for a 12-year-old. It really marks a point in your maturation that takes place at 12 that by the time you're 16, you're stealing 12-year-olds Halloween candy.
Exactly.
You know,
I agree.
I do have to say, I had the opportunity last year before everything started. There is a theater in Mississippi, the Sanger, that has now made it an annual process of showing this. And they do it, and then a couple weeks later do the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Wow.
And my wife, I have to mention Hocus Pocus or I get beat tonight. My wife will harm me because it was one of her favorite films. And you mentioned earlier, it just keeps growing. It is like she has a costume now. She was like, that wasn't a costume when I loved this when I was younger. And now she has a Winifred's costume, I believe. So you know, what does it say that it just does keep growing? Like I notice now I'm getting mail from Disney saying, hey, you should buy more Hocus Pocus stuff.
Yeah.
For a movie that they dropped in the summer.
Yeah.
Yep. That it was modestly successful, to say the most. But to be a part of something that has become iconic, I mean, that even more than The Stand, even more than anything else I've worked on, if I tell somebody that I wrote Hocus Pocus, everybody knows it. Everybody gets excited, especially at a certain age level. You know, if you grew up with it as a kid, what you love at 12 remains what you love at 50. You know, those things happen. And for this to have become so iconic and to have been on the ground floor of the creation of that, it's pretty thrilling, and it's an experience you don't have that often. I mean, they're remaking The Stand now, and so there's a lot more attention to that.
And you've got a cameo.
I do indeed, yeah. Unless it's on that, like I said, the virtual editing room floor. I don't know, but I have a feeling I'll survive.
Yeah, it better not be. That's all I'm saying.
So you could go ahead and just tell us what you were doing. I mean, obviously, we're not going to let anyone know, and our audience, all 3 of them, are going to keep quiet.
Well, I don't have any dialogue, so it's.
Is it more than what you're in Quick and the Dead?
Yes.
Okay.
A little bit. Well, they're about the same. About the same. At least I had to go back and do looping for the Quick and the Dead and got to just to go,
Please tell me you've not done that for any other interview.
I promise.
We just want to feel special. Sorry.
Yeah, you've got an exclusive. No, we talked about a lot of things on this show that I haven't talked about before.
Well, good. Well, that's our point. So Chad had one last. I know we promised you an hour, and I want to try to wrap it up as quickly as possible. We're going over.
This is just honestly, this is more of a silly question than anything. But I'm just kind of curious with.
And that's what you're going to end with?
No, I'm going to actually end with a couple other things.
He's going to end it, but I just got to. So Disney Plus was huge in the streaming world, you know, beating Netflix in most months. But when it first got introduced, did you ever think that Fuzz Bucket would get the exposure that it did? Because there have been so many articles about the strangest thing to find on Disney Plus, or the
Fuzz Bucket is.
Fuzz Bucket's at the #1 list. It's on so many sites, Mick. Did you ever think that would happen?
And Mr. Boogedy, yeah. You know, The last thing I expected was for anybody to have access to Fuzzbucket. I can't say it's a point of pride, but it was my first time out as a director, and it was unbelievably highly rated. You know, I mean, as far as the ratings go, people watched it, and it played on the Disney Channel for years when it was new. And, you know, it's not my finest hour, but it's there. And the fact that people are pointing at it as such an oddball entity is incredibly gratifying.
But, you know, Mick, I'd never, somehow or another, had missed it and had never seen it and caught it. I don't know if you knew this, but Turner Classic Movies was doing old Disney stuff later at night, especially on the weekends, sometimes Sunday. And they'd shown it several times, and that's where I caught it, was after midnight.
Idea. Wow.
Google it. Turner Classic Movies was doing old Disney. Like, you could watch the Three Caballeros uncut from the 40s, which you...
Now that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was DVRing stuff so I could catch it, things I'd never missed because I'm obviously a big-ass nerd. But that's how... I'd never seen it either, and I thought I'd seen everything. And I had to go back to IMDb and go, he did Fuzzbucket? What's the fuck is
That
Fuzzbucket?
was my debut, yeah.
But they got your DGA card, right?
Indeed I did, yeah. And, you know, it's great that it's out there. It has not aged particularly well. But for people to point out its oddness is, like I said, incredibly gratifying. And this is the first interview I've talked about Fuzzbucket.
Well, yay! It's just
Since 1986, anyway.
Yeah, it was just amazing when it came out. CNN, BuzzFeed, all of them had these articles, Mick, and Fuzzbucket was number 1 or number 2 on all their lists. And I'm like, did Mick ever see this kind of exposure happening again for Fuzzbucket? It's just
definitely not. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I'm still not a subscriber to Disney Plus, but I don't have kids.
Well, that's okay.
We do. It's not for the kids, Mick.
There's a few things on there, like Return to Oz. That's not for children.
Oh, yeah. Farousa Balk, though. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. But not for children.
I argue with Joe because I actually introduced Return to Oz to my 4 and 6-year-old, and they loved it.
Did they
I
stop
actually directed a pilot for the WB called Lost in Oz.
Lost in Oz, yeah.
That never was broadcast and was one of my favorite things I did for television. And what got picked up instead was a show called Birds of Prey, the DC.
Oh, no.
Which did not do well at all.
No.
So I was hoping they were kicking themselves for not putting Lost in Oz up. You can find it on YouTube, I think, and it's a lot of fun.
So one last question, like I said, I've always wanted to see because Desperation has one of my favorite endings to a novel when he brings back the hammer. God forgive me, I hate critics. It was one of, and I know the novel doesn't quite end there, but in my movie, that's for in my movie, in my mind, you know, I hate critics and him coming down. But you did it for television. But what I really want to ask about is Tobe Hooper, because I never got to meet Tobe. I was supposed to meet him in Chicago at a Fangoria Weekend of Horror. He didn't show, which I hear was typical.
Not unusual, yeah.
Yeah.
No. But you guys, you dedicated a whole postmortem to him with Bill Moseley, and I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting Stretch's real name.
Caroline.
Yeah. And you guys were close, and I dearly love, and we didn't talk about Masters of Horror, but I dearly loved his Damn Thing. It's right up there with Cigarette Burns.
And there's a hammer for you, yeah.
Would you? Yeah, and I love chocolate as well, but
thank you.
Why were you all so close? Because you clearly lost someone that you were having a hard time with.
It still hurts. You know, Tobe was such a generous and kind guy, and he's a guy, he kind of you know, fumble like this, and you want to like put in the words for him. And he was kind of a germaphobe, and yet he had this wildly gruesome imagination, this, you know, black humor, but so bloody. I call it red humor.
Red humor, yeah, I've heard you say.
And it's so dark, but it's funny. I mean, Chainsaw 2 may be my favorite Tobe Hooper film of all.
So
great.
Tonight, because there's not a lot of new horror films for Scarefest, I do a weekly. That's my 4 minutes tonight. Is I've already shot it, defending Chainsaw 2 and how I think even now, 34 Canon did 3 good movies, right? Is like that.
Firewalker.
No, not Firewalker, asshole. The Chuck
Life
Norris.
Force.
They had the 2 piles, right? Chuck.
Oh yeah, Invaders from Mars and Life Force. Yeah.
Invaders from Mars and Life Force, but
All Toby
Life
movies.
Force, I've defended it before too, even though it's an uneven film. I can't.
Even if only for Matilda May.
Matilda May is beautiful, but they spent $30 million on that, and they cast. I think the problem is Steve Rail's back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you agree with me as a filmmaker, because I've always said, I know Toby, it's bonkers, but I think if we had a solid lead actor in that movie, it would have worked.
Yeah, I think, Toby was a really wonderful guy and incredibly generous. And, we were very close. And I just appreciated who he was as a human being as well as an artist. Because here's this teddy bear of a guy, really shy in front of other people, and yet very articulate when he would do interviews. And I just really loved the guy. And it was so great to be able to give him an opportunity to do really good work and do whatever you want on Masters of Horror.
Mm-hmm.
And just as long as you can meet the budget and schedule, it's yours. You have final cut, all of that. And with a good script, Toby made great movies. If the scripts weren't great, then, they were stylishly made and beautifully made, but you can't make a good movie out of a bad script. You can make a bad movie out of a good script.
Yep.
But if you've got a good script, then you've got the platform for that. And Toby, unfortunately, was saddled with some projects that did not have the best screenplays. But when he was running on all cylinders, like he was on Masters of Horror, he kicked those scripts asses.
Yeah.
Really made something memorable and notable and very personal, And another thing that was special about him was, despite his age, he was like a 25-year-old first-time director each time out. He would study the equipment. He was on top of what visual effects were transforming and evolving into. He was on top. Even the Mangler had early CGI that he used very effectively. So, he was really a unique, wonderful guy and a very close friend, and I really, really miss him.
And I'm glad to hear you feel the same way about Chainsaw. I think people still don't get the humor, because what he did was, you can't imitate a film that's iconic. The movie that Ridley Scott, Chainsaw 1, said is the most formidable horror film.
Yeah.
You can't repeat that. So he went and did 180 Degrees and make a dark comedy.
Yeah, I mean, and Carolyn Williams and Bill Moseley are so great in that, and it was so great to get them together for the podcast. And then basically we used the audio from the TV version of Postmortem that we did with Toby 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Literally days before he died, we were planning on a podcast recording session, and that's what happened.
Yeah. Well, Mick, before we go, we would like to ask any upcoming projects, things that you want to talk about, anything that you'd like to let our audience know. Definitely Nightmare Cinema, but do you want to talk about your book and Postmortem?
Sure. Well, Postmortem, when there was the meltdown at Fangoria, all of the podcasts chose to leave.
Right.
Now, Fangoria has been sold, but not the podcast network. We are in the final stages of an agreement with a new home for Postmortem. I've recorded several shows already, and we're just waiting to be able to unleash that. I could not be more eager than anybody for that to happen.
And this is where you're going to give us the exclusive of who those guests are.
Yeah, I'll tell you one of them, and that's we're going to have Mike Flanagan on. We're doing that.
He's a fantastic filmmaker.
Wonderful guy. He's been on before, but before he did Dr. Sleep and The Haunting of Bly Manor and all of that stuff. So we're going to be talking about film adaptation for the Fantasia Film Fest, and then we're going to record it for our show. Amazing. But it'll be live at Fantasia. The film stuff and television stuff has all been kicked in the ass by the COVID, and there were things that were on the verge. We're in discussions with Shudder about doing a Nightmare Cinema 2, but that kind of went by the wayside when all of this came down. So there's still discussions going on. I've got a new book called These Evil Things We Do, the Mick Garris collection that is out there. And once again, published by Fangoria. And so that went under, but it's still available through Amazon on Kindle and paperback because Amazon publishes on demand.
Good.
And so there are a couple of stores that offer signed versions that I have signed for them, Dark Delicacies being one of them, and Overlook Connection.
Okay.
And my band from the 70s,
Horsefeathers.
actually, Horsefeathers put out our first album this year. We got a bunch of our best recordings.
Wow.
And added new vocals and instrumentation and really cleaned up the recording quality and everything. And it's now on Spotify and Apple Music and all of that. And it's called Symphony for a Million Mice by Horsefeathers. It's very prog rock, but with a sense of humor. And you can get signed by all the surviving band members. Our guitarist Mark Wittenberg passed away years ago. But the remaining 4 of us have signed special editions that you can buy the CD at info@horsefeathersmusic.com. So there's the business, which I really don't need to do, but since you offered, thank you.
I always offer. I listened to some of the Horsefeathers the other day. I wasn't familiar with it, and I don't know that I realized that you went back and redid some of the vocals. That's awesome. So you're getting to visit something that has to be. It's like digging up dead bodies in a sense of just revisiting that. And who is this young punk doing all this? Because it's a totally different man than you are now.
And yet the 4 of us have remained best friends ever since. We don't live in the same city, but we see each other occasionally. And it's always like it was yesterday that we saw each other. And going in and doing some harmonies with my own voice recorded originally was really so much fun to do and for everybody to revisit, because we have hours and hours of material, and these were what we considered the best to make our first album, 50 years after we formed.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mick Garris. You've been a gentleman and a scholar, and we appreciate it, and we've had a wonderful time. And check out all those things. And please check out Postmortem. Postmortem is one of those podcasts that I listen to consistently.
Yeah.
Thank you. Even though we're not on yet, we'll be back up. We've still got close to 100 shows that are
There's
available.
plenty of them out there with a lot of great interviews. You and the Movies That Made Us and Gilbert Gottfried are 3 of the ones that I listen to consistently. So thank you.
They're the ones I hear too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll go ahead and stop recording.
Ah.